Welcome to the Warriors Walk podcast. I am Keith Seymour. This is Todd Peters. We are here today to talk about the important aspect of evangelism for today's world, leveraging interests and hobbies and experiences for the sake of gospel conversations. So stay tuned for today's episode. Now, we are here and very passionate about this topic of evangelism. This is something that we really have shared a lot of common passion for over the years, something that we've really honed in and try to live out in our own personal lives. But today's topic is one that's, I think, crucial, where we think that a lot of Christians have this misconception that the only people that are sharing their faith are people that are pastors or missionaries or professional Christians. In a reality, God uses our influence and our interests and hobbies and experiences, our workplaces, to uniquely position us in a place where we can share the gospel with people that other people, like pastors, would not have access to. And so today we're going to share some of our own experiences of how that's played out in our own faith, in our own life. And so when it comes to even how we communicate the gospel, we want to make sure that we're leveraging every possible way, because we want to know that God is not just in one compartment of our lives where it's like, okay, the only people that really know we're Christians are when we go to church, and we're around our church friends. But we want to make sure that's permeating in our interests and hobbies. And this is something that I'm kind of fought against in my own, or almost felt bad for in my own life, because I have like all these different interests and different hobbies and experiences and stuff that I never really thought the Lord could use until more recent years, where I've seen the Lord, how he's used like different interests and hobbies that I've had to be able to share the gospel with other people. So share with us a little bit of your experience in that regard, because you have some unique experiences and passions that have positioned you as a person of influence in certain circles. What are some of those for you that the Lord has used for your interests and experiences?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is even just being a young teenager in a Bible college and, just studying to be a youth pastor. And then God directed my steps to go into the military, which I thought was going to be for a very short season. I ended up staying a lot longer. And one of the reasons I stayed, and certainly I put this on the table, I had a blast serving in the military. Like, it was fun, and certainly hard days too, but overall, like, I would sit down with my wife when it was time to think about, do I get out? Do I stay in? And we had a lot of fun, and just it afforded to allow us to live in so many interesting places. But it also allowed me to be with a group of guys that I think would have been really challenging for a pastor to reach. And so I got to live with them, it was in the same bar fights with them, and very unconventional ministry, but they were my brothers. And so because I had that relationship with them and their trust, when tough topics came up, a lot of times they would seek me out and we could have some serious conversations and really just talk about how God's the solution.
Yeah.
So that's where it started for me. And then I think from there, just thinking about the conversations over the years, really like what this episode's about, even thinking about how, like, I think about the men and women that are out there today doing secular work and how God can sanctify that and use it for his glory, right? So one, to encourage them. And then I tell people all the time, like, please don't think the solution is to get a pastor to come talk to your friend and share the gospel with them. Like, you're the gospel for them. And they know you, they're watching your life. And so me as a stranger, I don't have near the street cred as you as the guy that's hanging out with them all the time. Yeah. But one of the hobbies I leveraged over the years, I'm super passionate about it, and I just enjoy teaching and learning about it, is just survival and all things survival. And that brings out some interesting men and women out of the woodworks, because usually there's a level of paranoia. Some may be rightfully justified, and sometimes maybe a bit off the radar as far as how far they're taking things. But in the end, it really seems to set up some great gospel conversations and what real hope looks like.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember even going to Bible college, studying to be a youth pastor, and having such an interest in cars and modifying cars, and And I met a friend while I was at school that was into cars too, and we had just had these conversations like, how can we leverage this kind of interest and passion to kind of share with the car community, the gospel. And so part of it was just like thinking strategically about it, as far as like, how can we leverage our knowledge and our passion to meet people where they are, that other people, because we were like stuck on a Bible college campus, like, okay, how can we develop relationships outside, to share the gospel? And so we started going to Friday night like car hangouts and just talking cars and stuff with people. And we'd go down to the local drag strip and race our cars and stuff. And it was just a way to connect with people in ways that we didn't know that was possible at that point. Like, where we're just like, this is just what we're interested in. Like, how are we going to turn this into a ministry? And so much so that we even like had these dreams. And if it was funny, if I probably looked for it hard enough, I'd find we actually wrote up this like whole like ministry plan for like how to reach people with motorsports, and just to see that now, like, how the Lord's kind of grown in different areas of like, yeah, just really not apologizing, or not just like, deterring away. It's like, no, this is not what Christians should do. Like, but to really leverage that. It's like God has given you an interest or a passion, sometimes for a strategic reason to reach people with the gospel. And we had conversations with people, and we were kind of incarnationally involved with their lives in ways that, like, when there was a death in their family, like, they'd call us up, or when there was a hard time with their girlfriend, they'd call us up for some reason to get advice. And it's like, yeah, you should just not be in that relationship at all, And so when it comes to those unique relationships, I think we can overlook the possibility of using our interests and passions to really build those relational bridges that will be a connection for sharing the gospel and sowing those seeds, that we're sometimes we'll not see results right away, but those people call upon us when they know that they need some help or some advice.
And I think what I've observed is people know when you care about them, right? Mm-hmm. And so you and I, just for the listener's sake, like, there is no like, self-serving motive here. It really is a genuine, like, caring about somebody and helping them understand the truth. And like you and I like to promote, like, we really are these beggars who found the bread, and we're just letting other beggars know where it's at. And so it's in the spirit of humility, like, to restructure our lives in such a way where we can interact with others. Because I know I've shared this publicly. If I could have found a passage in the Bible that said, thou shalt go get a cabin in the middle of nowhere and fly fish for the rest of your life, I'd be on it. But those 59 one another's in the New Testament compel me to say that's not what God has in store for you. It's to be amongst it with people, and to be the light, and to be his ambassador. To me, I'm still blown away with that privilege, right? Like, who are you and I to represent the King of the universe with all our flaws, and yet he still chooses to work in and through us? Like, what a privilege.
Yeah. Well, and I think we have to realize that it's not just for pastors or missionaries to be, sharing the gospel. And there's kind of a cool illustration that I've done with students before, where it's like a whole room of students, and we compare multiplication versus addition. So if we were to count on these like Billy Graham type evangelists to reach like 1,000 people a day, how long would it take to reach the unreached peoples of the world? And when you do the math, it's like 1,500 years. Like, if we just have 10 just all-star, like rock star evangelists, like leading 1,000 people a day. But if you were to literally just take a group of 10 people and train them to be a disciple who will reach one person per year, and then teach other people how to reach person from year, we would actually have a multiplication strategy where you would see, people influencing, their spheres of influence, like with, interests and hobbies and workplaces and neighborhoods, for the gospel. Even pickleball has been a topic that we've discussed recently, about people like using that as a mission field to share the gospel with other people. And the idea of multiplication, we're talking like within a generation, we could see everybody, the whole world population, hear the gospel from a friend. And so when it comes to that idea of multiplication, like, to illustrate that, I went around and I was like, okay, everybody's sitting down. We're going to count in unison, and I'm going to come around and tap everybody on the shoulder. And as I tap you on the shoulder, you're going to stand up, and we're going to count how many seconds it takes for the whole room to stand up. So I literally just like ran around the whole room, tapping everybody on the shoulder. And it took, say 18 seconds for everybody to be standing. And so then I was like, okay, now when everybody sat back down, of course, by this time I'm like out of breath, because I was running around the room. And so now when I tag you, you're going to turn around and you're going to tag as many people as you can. And then as soon as they're tagged, then they're going to stand up as well. And see how long it takes. And almost invariably, no matter how many people are in the room, it's like minimal seconds compared to, I mean, so we've done, it's like 18 where I'm tagging everybody, and it's like 3 seconds for, for the multiplication aspect. And so that's why it's so crucial to leverage every aspect of your life, to not just see like compartments of Christianity in your life where it's like, okay, I'm only a Christian when I'm at church, or what, but to see that you're a representative, you're ambassador for Christ in these different areas.
Yeah. And I would say I've learned this from older brothers, but even developing habits, shopping in the same places, going to the same restaurants, so that you develop those relationships with the people you interact with there. I think that's super wise. And then we were talking about this the other day, but I've met a few people in the church that are so insulated that they're like, well, I never have met anyone that doesn't believe. And I'm like, well, then you need to get a hobby.
Yeah.
And just again, encouraging people to think about, like, what are you interested in? And we've seen this. We've seen people join softball leagues, golf clubs, you name it, just to be around people, bowling to have those conversations, right?
Yeah.
And so I applaud it. I think it's awesome. And some people do the extreme racing stuff. I mean, it really is, I guess, endless opportunities. But one of my favorite stories when we were doing the children videos during the lockdown and all that stuff, I remember a mom writing me, and it was one of those where I did it about kindness rocks and cookies and some other stuff. But her little 3-year-old boy, he wanted to give cookies to the garbage man. And that's as far as his take of the video was. But she relented. She made cookies for the garbage man. When the garbage man came by, he ran out there with joy and gave the garbage man cookies. And of course, the mom was right there with him. And she noticed the garbage man was so moved by it, like he started crying. It was a big deal. And he just looked at her and said, nobody's ever done anything like this for me. And she said, well, would you like to sit down and talk? And he said, actually, I just have one house left. I'd love to sit down and talk. So she made some coffee. They sat on the front porch, and she led him to know who Jesus Christ was that day on that porch, because a 3-year-old boy wanted to give him cookies.
Yeah.
So you never know. You never know how God can use you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that reminds me of a story years ago where there was a homeschool girl in our youth group that she was saying the same thing. She's like, I don't have anybody to share the gospel with. Like, you're challenging us to do this, but like, I don't really have anybody. And so I just challenged her to think creatively. It's like, oh, is there any places you can do like sports teams or neighborhood gatherings, whatever. And then she came back like a week or two later, and she's like, yeah, like I got to thinking, and I've always wanted to join a rock climbing gym. And so she joined this rock climbing gym, and through that experience, she reconnected with someone that she had like done dance lessons with, like as a child, like years ago, and reconnected with her because she was part of this gym too. And she started inviting her to the church, and long story short, this girl ended up coming to know Christ, and then just rocking her influential world with the gospel too. Like, she was sharing the gospel with her family, and many members of her family came to Christ. And she even started like a campus club at her school, and just like became like what we call is like the evangelism ninja. Like, she was just on fire for the Lord, sharing with everybody.
Yeah,
and,
I remember.
Yeah. And so with that, like, even just leveraging, places that you belong to, or, gyms, or, neighborhood gatherings, or, even HOA boards that you can be part of, just so you have more connections with people, can be a huge aspect.
Yeah. And then I think what's key for Christ followers too is knowing in those situations, like, who do you represent, right? And one, like, I imagine some people listening find this intimidating. Not everybody is hardwired like you and I, where we're way okay with being awkward. We were awkward as children, and we really never outgrew it,
Everybody's
right?
awkward, right?
Yeah. But it's this idea of like, so there's certainly, some trepidation there, but yet that's where, again, like, stay prayed up and know the word, and simply be obedient to God's leading, and know and remember how much he loves those people even more than you do. But then I think there's the other ones that need to hear the calmer side of the message, and that is to make sure they're sharing the truth in love. Like we shared about Charles Swindoll in a previous episode, our goal is not to win an argument, but to win a person, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good attitude to go into these things, is again, knowing people have stories, they have past hurts, and there's a lot of things you might have to overcome. But sitting on the sidelines, wishing is not the best method, right? It's actually, you need to get out there and go fishing if you want to catch fish.
Well, and that brings up another thing. So I have a interest in motorcycles, like old vintage motorcycles, like early 1900s, like where they were just starting to be created. And And it's been like a passion of mine for a number of years, and built my first one, motorized bike, from like the early designs and stuff. And then other people started asking me if I could build them one, and it turned into a business, that I'm even wearing representing my hat today, Seymour Cycle Works. And what has been fascinating about that whole experience was originally that experience of just starting that first one was, it was after a season of like really intense like burnout, where I'd had like some weird symptoms like physically, and my doctor was just like, well, have you tried like working with your hands on something just to kind of get your mind off stuff? And I was like, oh. And that's kind of what started. It was almost like a mental health, like, experience for me, just to, fix something or do something with my hands so that I'd have something to look at, like that was tangible. Cause like ministry can be very intangible. Like we don't see like the finished product like right away, or, it's like landscaping. I like mowing the grass cause I could see the finish.
Or the guy you work for is just, driving you nuts, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so with that though, that experience though, I found that there's a lot of guys in a similar boat where they're consumed with the pressures of stress and, from workplace or whatever, and just life in general, and they need that kind of creative outlet. And I almost developed like a theology behind that of how we're created by God in his image, and we participate with God's image when we create as well, like when we are creatively expressing ourselves. And so the bikes have been like a creative expression for that. But what I didn't expect is for it to take off on social media, where, like I have like almost 100,000 followers on Instagram and all around the world. And that's given me unique experiences and influence to share the gospel through social media as well. And so one of those experiences, and occasionally I'll just put up a story on my Instagram just saying like, hey, how can I pray for you? And I've been pretty vocal that I'm a pastor and stuff, on the on the business page and stuff too. And so that's generated a lot of interesting conversations. And so with that though, there was one guy that he had messaged me and said, hey, my grandmother's going through a really tough time right now, and if you could just be praying for her. So I said, yeah, I'll be praying for her. And a couple weeks later, he sends me a voice message through Messenger, through direct message on Instagram. He had recorded, and I could tell in his voice, he's like crying, like he's like emotional, like he's like, in tears. And he's like, I just want to say thank you, for praying for my grandmother. Like, it turns out that like, she had to go through this pretty major surgery, and she's going to be okay. But he had went through and he looked at some of the other videos that I created where I had actually shared the gospel. And he's like, because of like your act of kindness, like of sharing, how you can, or asking people for prayer requests, I went and watched this video, and he's like, I just gave my life to Christ. And wow. I felt like in that moment, I was like, I didn't do anything. Like, I just felt like, so like, I was like, I feel like I won an award for something I didn't do. Like, but I was like so excited that the Lord somehow used this, this experience in his life to really, and turns out he lives in Italy, place I've never physically been before. And it was just a cool experience of just seeing how just my interest of stepping out and, sharing this interest with the world, of these bikes that I build, and how that's led to conversations in even some of the most closed countries in the world that you couldn't really go as a missionary, but yet people are watching some of my content and seeing how I'm pointing to Christ. So you never know those influences and even experiences that you've had in the past, that you can share with other people and bridge that gap to the gospel. So has there been any experiences that you've gone through in the past that have enabled you to uniquely have conversations with people going through a similar experience?
Yeah, I trying to think of something specific, but I think in the end, what I recognize in general is that, excuse me, people know when you're authentic, and I just believe I'm learning and I'm growing still, that like the more transparent I am with my own struggles, I think that really helps people sync up with you pretty quick, because there is this presumption, depending on your bio, that you got it all together. And at the end of the day, we all are just, train wrecks, right? We're such a mess. And if it weren't for the grace of God, and I know that sounds really cliche, but to me, it's very real. Like I think about like growing up and, chewing Red Men and drinking beer, in grade school with my dad's motorcycle buddies. And like, if it were not for the grace of God, like I'd still be doing that. Right. And so it's, instead, getting swooped up by some grandpas who knew how to work a young man. But I just think situations in general, I think of gospel conversations since our granddaughter was diagnosed with leukemia. I think that's afforded opportunities. Me openly sharing about chronic pain, the migraines. I think that has brought in a lot of people that want to ask, hard questions, and even just some great theology taught from that, as far as why is there suffering and why does God allow that, and all these other great questions. And then even if you don't have all the direct answers, to be able to simply rest in what God's doing, right? And again, just proclaim like Job, like even if he slay me, like I am going to keep praising his name.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
so rather than a specific, I just think in general, like there's just principles that I've learned along the way. Yeah. And the feedback that I've heard. And I think the more we share, the more transparent we are of our struggles. And I've shared from the pulpit, like, when we share our joys, they're multiplied, going back to your math, right? And then when we share our sorrows, they're divided. And that's part of this journey too, as ambassadors for Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even just, working with a lot of teenagers that, have broken homes, I'm able to personally relate to that, it's because I was raised in a divorced home. And so when it comes to even just those type of experience where in the moment you're like, I don't know how the Lord could use this stuff, past experience that we've gone through to impact, but there's been countless conversations that even just this past weekend, I was talking with a young man that has comes from a broken home and was able to relate to that and share some of my experience with that too. So even with that though, we see sometimes our experiences as wasted, like that. It's like, how could God use something like this, or why is God doing this? And in reality, there's been countless times where things that I thought were so painful to go through in the moment, like are now being used for God's glory and a way to connect with people that I wouldn't expect. And so,
yeah,
definitely.
Well, I think too, for the believers listening, it's a reminder we need to be patient also with people that are still in process of figuring things out, because a lot of times we want them to be where we're at on the journey immediately, and it doesn't work that way. They want to microwave them right up to to be as holy as you are, and it's like, or you let them like walk this path, and certainly as an older brother or sister, you point the way and say, hey, here's a great route, like let's stay in the Word of God, let's stay in prayer, let's stay in fellowship, let's do these things, and we're going to stay on track. Yeah. If we go do these things, we're probably going to get off track, and we're going to suffer and probably have some injuries along the way.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go into a series of rapid fire questions that I want to ask you. And you've shared some of these with me before, but I don't know what your favorite has been, but what has been the coolest or your favorite, of course, declassified weapon that you've ever used?
Of course, declassified. I'm kind of an old school guy. I would say, like, if I were to say favorite, like Alaska Wild Guns in Anchorage, they make a custom 45-70 that shoots multiple weapons or multiple bullets, including a 410 round out of there. And so to me, it's called the co-pilot. So you can break this thing down and put it in a little briefcase, but like the ultimate bush pilot rifle. Oh. And again, like it's got enough harumph to deal with fur face if he's coming at you, but then you can switch over and get you some small game, ptarmigan, rabbit. And so to me, that's just a lot of fun to shoot. Like I like the old cowboy guns, and as much as there's all the cool Space Invader weapons out there and all the other cool stuff going on, there's nothing like a good old lever action for me. So that's one of my favorites.
And is that like so how many rounds would that usually take? Like, does it depend on the?
Usually, I mean, the tube configuration, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's 6+1 on this particular model. But again, like it's got a lot of harumph, and most likely in those close situations, like if you can get another round on target, so you want to make sure that first one is the real deal.
Yeah. Well, I know my dad was really into the Savage guns that had like the dual caliber, so you can fire a shotgun. It's like an over under. Yeah.
That's
it
what
was
I
like
learned
single
on.
shot. So it was like, once you shoot it once, you're like, all right, how fast can I reload this if I need a second round? So it's nice to, that there's multiple caliber or multiple bullet choices, but in multiple shots. So.
That's what I actually grew up. My grandfather got me a it was his. I got to learn to shoot, but it was just a 22 over a 410.
Yeah.
It was an old Savage.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
like
still
a
have
squirrel
it.
gun. Like,
That's what I used it for.
Yeah.
You try to plink them with the 22, and then if that didn't work, you just switch to the cannon, the 410, which as a little boy, that felt like a cannon.
Yeah. So my dad's made an effort to, at one point he owned like several different, variations of it, but now he's going back and he's trying to collect like everything that they offered. So, but yeah, with the 410 22, and I think it was like I think they even had like a pretty serious rifle, like I don't know if it was a 30-06 and a
they do it at 12 gauge. They do. Oh yeah,
like pretty intense. Yeah,
grown up version.
Yeah, exactly.
That could be fun too.
Yeah, no rabbit hunting with that. But anyways, with that, what's your favorite fruit that you have ever eaten? Because I'm sure you've been into some exotic places before that had different fruits that are not common. But do you have a favorite fruit?
Man, I don't know if I do have a favorite. I would say I probably consume more apples than any other fruit, but I like all the berries, especially like if you get them ripened. And then being spoiled in Alaska, they had something called a salmon berry, which was like a big fat raspberry, and those were delicious. And we would make jelly with them, and certainly that was a treat.
Yeah,
all day long.
I know where my brother lives in Montana, huckleberries are there's huckleberry everything. Like, it's just, huckleberry pie, ice cream, candy, like everything. But yeah, my favorite's blueberries. Those are mine. Yeah, had some this morning. All right, so what American food did you miss the most when you were deployed?
Good question. For me, it was just the staple crunchy peanut butter.
Really?
And I didn't miss it that much because I usually snuck one or two big jugs of it in my bag, and I would just allow myself a spoonful a day for sanity's sake. Like when I could, I'd just swoop on a little peanut butter.
So
boosted morale.
Yeah. Well, now, so crunchy over smooth. Do you still go crunchy?
Preferred, yeah.
Oh, okay. In a certain brand or no?
I'm sure there is one, but like.
Yeah, maybe a future sponsor of our podcast.
Oh yeah, that's what we need.
All right, so this last one is it's kind of cool because we as a church we like to send care packages to soldiers and write letters and everything. And so when you were deployed, what was your favorite gift or care package that you received from America?
So this one's fairly easy in that like. The only thing ultimately I received the most things from my wife and kids. And so those I treasured. Yep. My wife would put together these cute little albums and stuff like that. And back in the old days, like eventually they'd catch up with me at some point in the deployment. But there was one time outside of my wife and kids where I received a care package from a girl in my youth group who was a school teacher, and so she had all her kids, and I believe it was Desert Shield time frame, and I was working off the USS Saratoga. So we were one of the first SEAL platoons to work off an aircraft carrier, and we were boarding vessels. But I get this care package, and I don't remember all the other stuff. What I hanged on to, though, was these Valentine Day cards from all these little boys and girls that were first graders, I believe. And that meant a lot to me. And that, like, during that season, I'd been away from my wife for a long time, missed the birth of our firstborn, didn't see him till he was almost 4 months old. And so a lot of things going on, but then to actually get a care package of just these little kids writing down thank you and drawing their little army tanks or whatever they thought you were doing, that was really cool. And that definitely that made my day. So shout out to her if she ever happens to listen to the Warriors Walk, which I doubt, but hey, you never know.
Yeah, there you go. That's awesome. And what has been your favorite vehicle that you've ever driven? So I'm sure there's been some cool stuff that you've been able to experience in the military, but maybe even outside the military. What's been your favorite vehicle that you've ever driven?
So I'm going to throw you a curveball answer here. It's probably not what you think. So second vehicle I ever owned was a 66 Bug. Okay. And there's a couple reasons why I liked it. One, even going the speed limit felt terrifying, like you were going really fast. And so that was kind of cool about it. This one has some particular quirks. The windshield wipers didn't work, so I used shoestrings through the little side vent windows, and I would move them back and forth while I'm driving with my knees. The defroster didn't work, so I would use the little ice chiseler on the inside, and I'd carve me out a rectangle. And really bad days, I drove with my head out the window. Oh. It's what I dated my future wife in, and so she apparently didn't marry me for the money, and so I had that going for me. But I remember one time showing off with my cousins, and they live right down the street, and so I did plenty of showing off for my two younger cousins. But we went four-wheeling in a 66 Bug and got caught in a mudslide and landed in a lake, and we didn't sink. Like I hesitated, like the stereo I had in this Bug cost more than the Volkswagen. And I was like, oh no. And then I was like, hey, I think we're good. And so we got out, and sure enough, like the Bug stayed floating, and this guy came by in a bass boat. He's like, need a lift? And I was like, I do. And so he pulled us to the dock. We were able to push it out, and it started right up, and away we went. And so we kind of kept that to ourselves.
That's something you should like write Volkswagen about, like just saying, hey, one of your cars.
Well, I've seen it in shows, but you know how Hollywood, they apparently can make vehicles do things that are not possible.
Impressive.
So yeah, that's probably one of my favorite vehicles.
Would you buy another 66 Volkswagen Beetle if you saw?
I might if the opportunity is there. I mean, it's
reminiscent.
You know, I mean, it's a small little package, and it just makes packing up the coffin easier, right? Like if you get creamed in it. But no, it was just a lot of fun, and again, I have fond memories. You know, dating my wife in it, and I remember also I had the privilege of sharing a meal of Jim Zorn and Steve Largent, and so they were the quarterback wide receiver combo for the Seahawks back in the day. And they actually carpooled in a 66 Bug. I believe it was yellow. You can look it up on YouTube. And they're being interviewed. You know, everybody else has those fancy sports cars. And they're like, no, like, this is awesome. We save money by carpooling, and it gets good gas mileage. And, like, going the speed limit feels really fast. And I was like, that's the 66 Bug.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, good stuff. Well, what kind of survival tip do you have for us today as we close?
So this one, again, is understated, but I've seen the mistake enough. And actually, I was recently on Kevin Estelo's podcast on Fieldcraft Survival, and we were talking about this, like one of our pet peeves. When you buy a survival kit, like take it apart, get all the wrappers out, and actually train and work with the survival kit you're going to carry to save your life. Too many times people have a brand new survival kit, they stick it in a bag, they stick it in a vehicle, and then when the time pops, they're not familiar with it. They don't know how to use it. They don't even know what they have. And so huge, like regardless of what you buy, play with it, make sure you know how to use it, because some of the stuff in there might be junk. It may not work. And so you definitely want to go through your survival kit and make sure you have things for every category. And
it's like use every Band-Aid and
you know what I mean? Like it's
everything.
Well, I mean, we even saw that when we would teach in Alaska. We would see guys showing up, taking off wrappers of their tent or their ground pad, ridiculous things. Like you would never take that in the field. And so if you want to know a great survival tip, whatever survival kit you're carrying, like train with it. And then the one that you actually have, like put it away and keep expiration dates visible if you have stuff that expires. Keep an eye on a lighter fluid because it tends to evaporate in higher temps. Like there's all these things to go through, but to train with the kit that you carry is a super great survival tip.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for the tip. So that concludes another episode of the Warriors Walk podcast. We're so glad that you guys have joined us. We actually have listeners from places like Canada and the UK, and I think we had
South Africa,
and I believe Australia, New Zealand, and then even Costa Rica. And so, if you are listening from any of those places, watching from any of those places, we'd love to meet you in the comments. Let us know where you're watching this from, and listening to this from. So, thank you guys so much for your support, and of course, share this with anybody else that you believe would benefit from it. Thank you guys so much for this episode, for watching and tuning in, and we'll see you next time.